Marcus Chen had been flying cargo runs for 3 years, but the emergency klaxons screaming through his cockpit still made his heart race. The navigation computer flickered between red warnings as his ship, the Steady Hand, shuddered through the atmosphere of an unmarked planet. "Come on, girl," he muttered, wrestling with controls that responded like they were moving through thick mud. "Just give me one more landing." The ship struck ground hard, bouncing twice before sliding across what looked like purple grass. Metal groaned and sparked, but the hull held. Marcus sat in the sudden silence for a moment, then began his emergency checklist. Life support was stable, communications were down, and the engine core was cooling but intact. He could survive, maybe even repair the ship, but he'd need to find water and shelter first. The cargo bay held medical supplies bound for the Centauri colonies, but Marcus had learned to pack his own survival gear. He strapped on his sidearm, shouldered his emergency pack, and cycled the airlock. The planet's air hit him like a warm summer evening, carrying scents of growing things and something wild he couldn't identify. The landscape stretched in rolling hills covered in that purple grass, dotted with trees that looked almost normal except for their silver bark. 2 moons hung in the afternoon sky, one large and pale, the other smaller and faintly blue. Beautiful. But Marcus had seen enough frontier worlds to know beauty could hide danger. He was checking his water recycler near a small stream when he heard it, a sound that made something deep in his chest respond before his mind could process it. Not quite a howl, not quite a song, but something in between that seemed to carry impossible distances. The sound was lonely, desperate, and completely alien, yet somehow familiar. Marcus found himself walking toward the sound before he consciously decided to move. His tactical training screamed warnings, but something deeper overrode caution. The call came again, weaker this time, and he broke into a run. He found her in a clearing surrounded by those silver-barked trees. She was unlike anything he'd ever seen, but his mind immediately supplied the word, werewolf. She stood nearly 7 feet tall on legs that bent at odd angles, covered in fur that shifted from deep brown to gold in the strange sunlight. Her face was elongated like a wolf's, but with larger, more expressive eyes that held intelligence and pain. She was bleeding from multiple wounds, and 3 creatures that looked like her but larger circled her with predatory intent. Their fur was darker, their movements more aggressive, and when they saw Marcus, they bared fangs that caught the light. The injured female made that sound again, the call that had drawn him. But now he was close enough to hear the others' response. They snarled at her, and one snapped at the air near her throat. She flinched but didn't back down. Marcus didn't speak their language, couldn't understand their conflict, but he recognized bullying when he saw it. On Earth, in the colonies, apparently even on unmarked planets, some things never changed. The strong picked on the weak, and decent people had a choice to make. He stepped between the female and her attackers. The 3 larger aliens stopped, clearly surprised. The biggest one, with scars across his muzzle, said something in a language of growls and barks. When Marcus didn't respond, the alien took a step forward, hackles rising. Marcus had faced down pirates, survived 3 combat drops, and once stared down a Rigelian war chief in a bar fight. He knew how to project calm confidence even when his heart was hammering. He spread his feet shoulder-width apart, kept his hands visible but ready, and met the scarred alien's gaze directly. "Easy there, big guy," Marcus said in his most reasonable voice. "Let's all take a step back and think about this." The scarred alien's ears flicked, probably picking up the tone even if he couldn't understand the words. He said something else, this time including gestures toward the female and what looked like dismissive hand waves. The female stepped up beside Marcus, close enough that her fur brushed his arm. She made a series of sounds, not the howl song from before, but something more like words. The other three responded with what could only be laughter, cruel and mocking. Marcus didn't need translation. He'd heard that tone in a dozen different languages across half the galaxy. They were telling her she was worthless, weak, not good enough, and she was arguing back, probably defending herself or pleading for acceptance. "Yeah, I don't think so," Marcus said. He reached slowly into his pack and pulled out an emergency ration bar. He broke it in half, ate one piece himself, then offered the other half to the female beside him. She looked at it uncertainly, then at him, then took the food with hands that were more like paws but retained surprising dexterity. The simple act of sharing food changed something in the clearing. The three larger aliens stopped snarling and began making different sounds, still hostile, but with an undertone of confusion. The female ate the ration bar quickly, then made that howl song again. This time, Marcus was close enough to feel it as much as hear it. The sound seemed to resonate in his bones, and he found himself understanding things that weren't in the words. Loneliness, hope, gratitude, and something else. A connection he couldn't name but felt as real as gravity. The scarred alien barked something sharp and final-sounding, then turned and stalked away. The other two followed, but not before one of them made what was clearly a threatening gesture toward Marcus. When they were gone, the female sank to the ground, either from relief or exhaustion. Marcus knelt beside her, pulling his first aid kit from his pack. "Easy," he said softly. "Let me help with those cuts." She watched warily as he opened the medical kit. But when he showed her the antiseptic wipe and mimicked cleaning a wound, she nodded. Her fur was coarser than it looked, and the cuts were deeper than he'd first thought. She bore the treatment stoically, only flinching when he had to clean debris from the worst gash. "There," Marcus said when he'd finished. "That should help." She made a soft sound, not the howl song, but something that might have been thanks. Then she stood, tested her weight on her injured leg, and gestured for him to follow. Marcus hesitated. His survival training said to stay near the ship, establish a perimeter, wait for rescue. But rescue could be days or weeks away, and something told him this alien female might be his best chance of surviving long enough to be found. He followed her through the forest of silver trees, noting how she moved despite her injuries. Fluid, alert, constantly testing the air with her nose. She led him to a cave system hidden behind a waterfall, with clear water and natural shelter. Better than anything he would have found on his own. As the larger moon rose and cast strange shadows through the cave mouth, the female made her howl song again. This time, Marcus heard an answer from the distance, multiple voices, a complex harmony that made his skin prickle with something that wasn't quite fear. She looked at him with those intelligent eyes and made a series of sounds. He had no idea what she was saying, but her tone was clear. "They're coming, and I don't know what they'll do when they find you here." Marcus checked his sidearm and settled back against the cave wall. "Well," he said to his alien companion, "I guess we'll find out together." The howl song came again from the darkness outside, closer this time, and the female beside him lifted her head to answer. But this time, something was different. Her call was stronger, more confident, and when the distant voices responded, there was a note of surprise in their harmony. Marcus didn't understand what had changed, but he felt it. Something about his presence, his choice to protect her, his willingness to share food and tend her wounds. Something about those simple human gestures had altered whatever dynamic existed between her and her kind. As footsteps approached through the night, Marcus found himself hoping that change would be enough to keep them both alive until morning. Because whatever was coming through that waterfall, he had a feeling his and her fates were now bound together in ways he was only beginning to understand. The first shadow appeared at the cave mouth, backlit by moonlight, and Marcus heard the female beside him draw in a breath that might have been preparation for another howl song. This one, he suspected, would determine whether he lived to see tomorrow or became just another human who'd made the mistake of thinking he could understand alien ways. But as she lifted her head and filled her lungs, Marcus realized something that would have surprised him if he'd had time to think about it. He wasn't afraid. Whatever happened next, he'd made the right choice. Sometimes, that had to be enough. The pack that emerged from the waterfall's mist moved like liquid shadow. Marcus counted 8 of them, ranging from slightly smaller than his companion to massive creatures that would dwarf the scarred alien from earlier. Their eyes reflected the moonlight as they arranged themselves in what was clearly a practiced formation. Not quite threatening, but ready to become so in an instant. The female beside him stood slowly, favoring her injured leg, and made a complex series of sounds. The largest of the newcomers, a massive male with silver-shot fur, responded in kind. Marcus didn't need to understand the words to recognize the dynamic. She was explaining, possibly pleading, and the big male was not entirely convinced. Then the female did something that surprised everyone, including Marcus. She reached out and gently touched his arm, then made her howl song. But this time, instead of the lonely call he'd first heard, the sound was rich and layered, carrying harmonics that seemed to wrap around him like warm cloth. The pack's reaction was immediate and startling. Several took involuntary steps backward, ears flattening. The silver-shot leader made a sharp bark that sounded like a question, and when the female nodded, his massive head swiveled to study Marcus with new intensity. "I'm guessing that was significant," Marcus said quietly. The female looked at him, then at her pack, and made what sounded like an introduction. She pointed to herself and said something that sounded like, "Za-ra." Then she pointed to him and waited expectantly. "Marcus," he said, touching his chest. "Marcus Chen." She repeated it carefully. The sound strange in her throat but recognizable. Then she turned to the pack and said his name again, followed by more of their complex language. The silver-shot leader stepped forward and made what was clearly a formal greeting, placing one large hand over his heart and inclining his head. Marcus returned the gesture as best he could, and several pack members made sounds that might have been approval, but not all of them. 3 of the smaller males exchanged glances that Marcus recognized from 100 different species and cultures. They thought this was a mistake. Over the next several hours, as the moons tracked across the sky, Marcus learned more about the situation than he'd expected. The pack, Zara's pack, as he'd started thinking of them, was in trouble. Through a combination of gestures, simple drawings in the dirt, and Zara's growing attempts to bridge the language gap, he pieced together the basics. Zara's howl song was different from the others. Where their calls seemed to be pure communication, hers carried something else, an emotional resonance that could affect the listener's state of mind. Among her people, this was considered either a great gift or a dangerous weakness, depending on who was judging. Most packs had rejected her because they couldn't control or predict her influence, but now, with Marcus present, something had changed. Her song had somehow amplified, become more focused, and the pack was trying to understand what that meant. The silver-shot leader, whose name sounded like Koran, spent considerable time studying Marcus. He would ask Zara questions, listen to her responses, then approach Marcus and make careful observations, testing his reflexes, his reaction to sudden movements, his response to different pack members. It felt like an interview conducted in a language Marcus didn't speak, for a job he didn't understand. As dawn approached, Koran made what sounded like a decision. He barked a series of commands, and the pack began to move. Zara gestured for Marcus to follow, and they set off through the forest at a pace that had him jogging to keep up. They traveled for most of the morning, following game trails that wound through increasingly dense woodland. Marcus noticed they were climbing, and the air grew thinner. More importantly, he noticed they were being followed. He caught glimpses of movement in their wake, flashes of dark fur, the occasional reflection of watching eyes. When he pointed this out to Zara, she nodded grimly and spoke to Koran. The big leader's response was a low growl that needed no translation. They were being hunted. The pack reached their destination just before midday. A natural amphitheater carved into the mountainside with clear sight lines in all directions and only 2 approaches. A defensive position, Marcus realized. They were preparing for a fight. Corin spoke to the pack, his tone formal and serious. Then he turned to Marcus and made gestures that were unmistakably about proving oneself. Challenge. Test. Trial. Great, Marcus muttered. Job interview by combat. But Zara stepped between them, speaking rapidly to Corin. Her tone was urgent, almost pleading, and Marcus caught his own name several times in her words. The pack leader's expression shifted from determination to curiosity, and he made what sounded like a question. Zara's response was to make her howl song again, but this time she directed it specifically at Marcus. The sound washed over him like a warm tide, and suddenly he could sense things he hadn't noticed before. The emotional undercurrents of the pack, Corin's protective concern, the 3 skeptical males barely contained hostility, and underneath it all, a current of fear. They weren't just being followed. They were being stalked by something that had them genuinely frightened. "Show me," Marcus said, though he wasn't sure if he was speaking to Zara or to whatever new sense her song had awakened in him. The answer came not in words, but in shared understanding. Images flowed between them, another pack, larger and more aggressive, led by the scarred male from yesterday. They wanted this territory, this defensible position, and they were willing to kill for it. But more than that, they wanted Zara. Her unique song, her ability to influence emotions. In the wrong hands, it could be a weapon. Marcus felt Zara's terror at that prospect, her desperation to protect the pack that had finally accepted her, and her growing determination to fight rather than be taken. He also felt something else. Her absolute trust in him, her certainty that he would help, even though he had no obligation to do so. "Okay," Marcus said aloud, breaking the connection. "I understand." Corin was watching this exchange with fascination, clearly sensing something had passed between the human and Zara, even if he couldn't interpret it fully. When Marcus turned to face him, the pack leader's expression was expectant. "You want to know what I can do?" Marcus said. "Fair enough." He walked to the edge of the amphitheater and studied the approaches, then turned back to the pack. Using gestures and the dirt as a drawing board, he began to explain concepts that had been refined by human military thinking over thousands of years. Crossfire zones, overlapping fields of fire, the funnel of death. The pack had natural advantages: speed, strength, enhanced senses, and intimate knowledge of their territory. But they fought like wolves, each following instinct and individual prowess. Marcus showed them how to fight like humans, coordinated, tactical, multiplying their individual strengths through cooperation. Using rocks to represent pack members, he demonstrated how they could control the approaches to the amphitheater, how 3 fighters positioned correctly could stop twice their number, how apparent retreat could become a trap, how Zara's song could be used not just for communication, but for psychological warfare. Corin watched intently, occasionally asking questions through gesture and expression. Other pack members gathered around, their skepticism gradually giving way to interest. Even the 3 hostile males began to pay attention when Marcus showed how the tactics could let a smaller force defeat a larger one. But it was when he demonstrated the concept of sacrifice that he truly won them over. "Sometimes," Marcus said, knowing they couldn't understand his words but hoping they'd read his intent, "the best way to protect the pack is to put yourself at risk." He positioned himself at the most dangerous point in his tactical plan, the spot that would draw the most attention, take the heaviest fire, and have the lowest chance of survival. Then he looked at each pack member in turn, making it clear that he was volunteering for the position that would save their lives at the cost of his own. The silence that followed was broken by Zara's soft whimper. She moved to his side and made a series of urgent sounds to Corin, clearly objecting to Marcus's proposed sacrifice. But Corin's response surprised them both. The big leader approached Marcus, placed both massive hands on his shoulders, and spoke in tones that were unmistakably formal and ceremonial. Then he stepped back and howled, not Zara's emotional song, but a deep, primal call that echoed off the canyon walls. One by one, the rest of the pack joined in until the amphitheater rang with their combined voices. When the sound faded, Marcus realized something fundamental had changed. The way they looked at him, positioned themselves around him, even their scent had altered. "I think," he said to Zara, "I just got adopted." Her response was to lean against him, her massive frame warm against his side, and make a sound that needed no translation. Content. Safe. Home. But their moment of peace was shattered by answering howls from the forest below. The enemy pack had found them, and they were announcing their arrival with the confidence of predators who knew they had their prey cornered. Marcus counted the voices, at least 12, maybe more. Corin's pack was outnumbered. But now they had something their enemies didn't expect: human tactical thinking and a bond that transcended species. "Zara," Marcus said, "I need you to translate something for me." She nodded, her attention focused despite the approaching danger. "Tell them," Marcus said, "that we're not trapped up here with our enemies, they're trapped down there with us." As Zara's howl song carried his words to the pack, Marcus saw understanding dawn in their eyes. They weren't victims preparing to be slaughtered. They were hunters who had chosen their ground and were about to demonstrate why humans had become the apex predators on every world they'd colonized. The enemy howls grew closer, filled with bloodthirsty anticipation. But when Corin's pack responded, their voices carried something new, not fear or desperation, but the coordinated battle cry of warriors who knew exactly what they were going to do. Marcus checked his sidearm, counted his ammunition, and took his position at the killing ground's focal point. Around him, the pack moved to their assigned positions with the fluid precision of natural predators enhanced by tactical doctrine. "Come on, then," Marcus said to the approaching enemies. "Let's see how you deal with humans and wolves working together." The first shadows appeared at the forest edge, and Zara's song rose into the morning air, no longer a call for help or acceptance, but a war cry that promised her pack's enemies would learn exactly why species bonded with humans had conquered the galaxy. The enemy pack emerged from the forest with the arrogant confidence of predators who had never encountered organized resistance. Marcus counted 14 of them, led by the scarred male who had confronted Zara the day before. They moved in a loose formation that spoke of individual prowess, rather than coordinated tactics, exactly what Marcus had hoped for. The scarred leader called out across the amphitheater, his voice carrying the universal tone of a bully offering terms that weren't really negotiable. "Surrender, Zara. Abandon the territory. Submit or die." The same ultimatum that had been delivered in 1,000 different languages on 100 different worlds. Corin's response was a single sharp bark that needed no translation. The counteroffer was simple: come and take what you want, if you can. Marcus felt Zara tense beside him, her song building in her throat but held back, waiting for his signal. Around the amphitheater, Corin's pack held their positions with the discipline of soldiers, each fighter exactly where Marcus had placed them for maximum effect. The enemy leader snarled something that was probably an insult, then gestured for his pack to advance. They came in a rush, expecting to overwhelm their smaller opponents through sheer numbers and aggression. They ran straight into the first lesson humans had learned about warfare: terrain matters more than numbers. The amphitheater's natural funnel channeled the attackers into a killing ground where Marcus had positioned Corin's 3 strongest fighters. Instead of meeting 14 enemies at once, they faced 4 at a time, while the rest were forced to wait their turn or scramble up nearly vertical rock faces. But Marcus had learned something about the alien pack dynamics that their enemies hadn't expected. When Zara's song rose into the morning air, it didn't just communicate, it coordinated. The 3 fighters at the bottleneck moved with perfect synchronization, their individual strengths multiplied by tactical precision and emotional unity. The first wave of attackers staggered under the coordinated assault, 2 of them going down hard while the others fell back in confusion. This wasn't the chaotic individual combat they'd expected. This was something new and deadly. The scarred leader roared commands, trying to regain control of his scattered forces. He sent teams up the steep sides of the amphitheater, attempting to flank Corrin's positions. But Marcus had anticipated this, and Zara's pack was ready. As the flanking teams struggled up the rocky slopes, they found themselves under coordinated attack from above. Rocks cascaded down in carefully timed avalanches, while pack members struck from concealed positions and then melted back into cover before retaliation could reach them. It was brutal, efficient, and completely contrary to everything the enemy pack understood about combat among their kind. They were fighting individual duels against an organism that responded as a single entity. But the scarred leader was no fool. After the first few repulses, he began to adapt, splitting his forces and probing for weaknesses in Marcus's tactical arrangement. And gradually, inevitably, he found them. Marcus was good at tactics, but he wasn't magical. Corrin's pack was outnumbered, and individual skill could only be multiplied so far by coordination. As the battle wore on, gaps began to appear in their defensive line. "Zara," Marcus called, "we need to adjust." Her song shifted, carrying new instructions to the pack. Fighters pulled back from exposed positions, consolidated around stronger defensive points, began the kind of fighting withdrawal that had saved human armies for millennia. But the enemy leader had finally figured out the key to their tactical coordination. Every adjustment, every command, every bit of coordination flowed through Zara's song. Cut off her ability to communicate, and Corrin's pack would revert to individual fighters who could be overwhelmed. Marcus saw the realization dawn in the scarred alien's eyes, saw him gesture to his remaining fighters and point directly at Zara. The message was clear. Kill the singer, break their coordination, win the battle. "They're coming for you," Marcus told her, chambering around in his sidearm. "Stay behind me." But Zara had understood the tactical situation as clearly as he had. Her response was to step beside him, not behind, and begin a song that was unlike anything she'd produced before. This wasn't communication or coordination. This was something primal and powerful that made the hair on Marcus's arms stand on end. The effect on the enemy pack was immediate and dramatic. Several of them stumbled, suddenly disoriented. Others began snarling at each other instead of focusing on their targets. The coordinated assault on Zara's position dissolved into chaos as her song worked on their emotions like a weapon. But the effort was taking everything she had. Marcus could see her trembling with the strain, could feel through their strange bond how much of herself she was pouring into the song. She was burning out, using abilities that weren't meant to be sustained at this level. The scarred leader seemed to realize this too. Instead of pressing the attack, he called his remaining fighters back and began to circle the amphitheater's edge, staying just out of range, while Zara exhausted herself, maintaining her defensive song. It was sound tactics, and Marcus found himself grudgingly respecting an enemy who could adapt under fire. But it was also exactly the kind of mistake humans had learned to exploit over centuries of warfare. "Zara," he said quietly, "I need you to trust me completely." She looked at him with those intelligent eyes, her song never faltering, and somehow conveyed absolute faith despite the chaos around them. "When I give you the signal," Marcus continued. "I want you to do something that's going to seem like surrender. But it's not. It's the most aggressive thing you can possibly do." He explained quickly, using their shared bond to convey concepts that had no words in either of their languages. It was a gamble that would either win the battle decisively or get them both killed, with no middle ground. Zara's response was to lean against him for just a moment, sharing strength and warmth, before nodding her understanding. Marcus waited until the enemy pack had positioned themselves exactly where he wanted them, spread out around the amphitheater's rim, thinking they had their prey trapped. Then he gave Zara the signal. Her song stopped. The sudden silence was deafening. For a heartbeat, nobody moved, as if the absence of her voice had frozen time itself. Then the scarred leader howled in triumph and led his pack in a final charge, converging on Marcus and Zara from all sides. They made it halfway across the amphitheater before Zara's real song began. This wasn't the communication or coordination she'd used before, or even the emotional disruption of her defensive song. This was something that reached deeper, into the places where pack instincts and social bonds were written into DNA. It was a call that transcended species, that spoke to the fundamental need for belonging and protection that united all social creatures. And it wasn't directed at the enemy pack. Marcus felt other voices joining in from beyond the amphitheater, first one, then several, then dozens. Corrin's pack wasn't the only group that had heard Zara's call. Other packs, neutral clans, even solitary individuals who had been drawn by the sound of a song that promised something they'd never experienced before. The forest around the amphitheater erupted with movement as alien figures poured from concealment, not attacking, not defending, but simply responding to a call that bypassed conscious thought and spoke directly to the social instincts that made pack life possible. The scarred leader's charge faltered as he realized his flanks were suddenly exposed to dozens of newcomers whose intentions were unclear. His fighters looked around in growing panic as they found themselves outnumbered 10-1 by aliens who watched them with cold disapproval. But it was when one of the newcomers, a massive female with silver-white fur, approached Marcus directly that the true meaning of the situation became clear. She studied him with intelligent eyes, then turned to face the scarred leader and made a sound that was unmistakably a challenge. Others joined her until the enemy pack found itself facing not just Corrin's defenders, but a coalition of packs that had never worked together before. All united by their response to Zara's song, all willing to defend the strange partnership that had made such a song possible. The scarred leader looked around at the overwhelming odds, at the unified hostility of forces that should have been fractured and competitive, and made the only rational decision available. He barked a retreat order, and his surviving followers melted back into the forest as quickly as they'd appeared. In the sudden calm that followed, Marcus found himself at the center of a gathering unlike anything that had occurred in the aliens' recorded history. Multiple packs, traditional enemies, and rivals, standing together in the same space without violence. Zara's song had become something else now. Not the commanding call that had summoned the alliance, but a gentle harmony that seemed to help the different groups tolerate each other's presence. She was exhausted, leaning heavily against Marcus, but her voice continued to weave connections between aliens who had never imagined peaceful cooperation was possible. The silver-white female who had first approached Marcus stepped forward again. When she spoke, her tone was formal and ceremonial, and every pack leader present listened with respectful attention. Zara translated in whispers, her voice hoarse from strain but alive with excitement. The female, an elder whose authority transcended individual pack boundaries, was proposing something unprecedented. A formal alliance between packs mediated by Zara's unique abilities and Marcus's tactical knowledge. "She's offering us territory," Zara explained. "Not just this amphitheater, but a whole region. Enough space for multiple packs to coexist, and she wants you to teach other humans how to bond with our kind the way you bonded with me." Marcus looked around at the assembled aliens, at Corin's proud expression, at the respect and curiosity in dozens of intelligent eyes. This wasn't just about surviving a territorial dispute anymore. This was about the beginning of something entirely new. "What do you think?" he asked Zara. "Ready to become ambassadors?" Her response was to lift her head and sing again, not the desperate call for help he'd first heard, not the coordinated commands of battle, but something joyful and welcoming that seemed to invite the entire galaxy to listen. And as her song echoed off the canyon walls and carried into the forest beyond, Marcus realized that his emergency landing had become something much more important than a rescue mission. It had become first contact between humanity and a species that could enhance human emotional bonds in ways that would change both civilizations forever. The Silver-White Elder made another formal pronouncement, gesturing toward Marcus and then toward the sky where his ship waited for repair. When Zara translated, Marcus understood that he was being offered not just alliance, but adoption into a network of relationships that spanned multiple worlds. "She says," Zara explained with something that might have been laughter in her voice, "that if one human can do this much with one pack, she's very interested to see what happens when your people meet ours officially." Marcus looked up at the moons still visible in the morning sky, thinking about the communications equipment in his ship, about the trade routes that passed near this system, about the opportunities that would open up when word of this partnership reached human space. "I think," he said, "we're about to find out." As if summoned by his words, the distant sound of atmospheric engines echoed across the forest. A search and rescue ship, following his emergency beacon. But instead of feeling relief at imminent rescue, Marcus felt a moment of regret. His time as the only human in an alien pack was about to end. Zara seemed to sense his thoughts, because her next song was soft and personal, meant for him alone. In its harmonics, he heard promise and continuity, the assurance that their bond wouldn't be broken by the return to civilization. When the rescue ship landed in the clearing beside his damaged freighter, Marcus walked down to meet them with Zara at his side and an honor guard of alien pack leaders behind them. He could see the shock on the rescue team's faces as they took in the sight of a human walking freely among creatures that looked like nothing in their xenological databases. "Control, this is Rescue 7, the team leader said into his comm unit. "We've found Chen, but the situation is unprecedented. Request immediate contact with Xenological Services and Diplomatic Corps." As the team leader spoke, Zara began to sing again, not for the packs this time, but for the humans who were experiencing their first contact with her kind. It was a song of welcome and peace, and Marcus watched the rescue team's tension ease as they found themselves responding to harmonics that spoke directly to human social instincts. "Gentlemen," Marcus said with a smile, "let me introduce you to the future of human-alien relations." Above them, both moons reached their zenith, casting strange light on a scene that would be remembered as the moment two species realized they were stronger together than either could ever be alone.